right, church. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. I'm excited. I'm always excited. We have a good pastoral staff. You know, I said it a number of weeks ago, but we really do have a good pastoral staff, and the preparation, the word, the spirit that you bring, it is noticed, and if it's not noticed, it's felt. So be encouraged by that. And be encouraged this morning, church, because we are kicking off four-part sermon series on fear. And today, you guys are just jumping off fear of change. Like, that's in the top 3 of all-time fears. So we're just going at it right off the bat. And so I figured, we'll do the same. We'll come right at it with this song. Regardless of the fear, and we have many of them, right? A lot of fears, a lot of phobias, a lot of things that cause us hesitation, but this song is a great reminder, and we associate darkness a lot of times with that fear, right? But this song speaks gospel truth and reminds us that there is a light that shines in the darkness, and we serve a God who makes that darkness tremble. And so we are bringing that spirit to your word this morning. So let's sing together.
Peace, bring it all to peace. A storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the raging me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones to live, and call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive and forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive and forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Wow. It's a privilege in this job to have the chance to come up here every Sunday and offer a postlude to the sermon, to the message, the good word that's already been brought. Thank you, praise team. We appreciate you so much. All right, we are today starting this four-part series on the question of fear. We know we are living in unsettling times, right? And I'd like for us to wrestle with the fact that fear has been a constant companion for so many of us, and talk about why that might be the case. Now, as we do that, I thought it might be helpful for us to look into the book of Daniel, to use the book of Daniel as a guide for this conversation around the question of fear. Daniel is one of just two exilic books in the Old Testament, and what that means is that it's focused on the issues and topics of the exile itself. Esther is the other exilic book. And because we're continuing here in our own season of exile, if you will, I thought it might be interesting for us to study one of these exilic books. Now, I was surprised as I looked back across my sermons of the past 6 years, and I've been here for 6 years, which surprised me too, that I hadn't preached a single sermon on the book of Daniel. So I thought that as we wrestled with these questions of fear, this might also be a good opportunity for us to get to know the book of Daniel. And here's the challenge, should you choose to accept it. Let's all read the whole thing during the month of July. It's only 17, did I get over here? It's only 17 pages, 12 chapters, 17 in my NRSV pages. That is less than 2 pages a day. So let's all try to challenge ourselves to live into and read this entire text. And if you notice interesting things along the way as you study, don't hesitate to drop me an email, give me a phone call, tell me about those things. But be forewarned that I am not the least bit afraid to use your interesting observations in my sermons, and if I'm lucky, maybe I won't have to come up with any interesting ideas of my own over the next few weeks here. All right, let's talk today about the first 2 chapters of Daniel, Daniel chapters 1 and 2, and let's start here with a brief synopsis. Now, we are in or around 605 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has taken Jerusalem, and he commands that some of the most promising young men of the Jewish nobility be brought to Babylon and trained to be members of the Babylonian court. So several are taken, and the 4 that emerge as the most capable are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the palace master gives Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and you might recognize the other 3 by the names the palace master gives them: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, early on, Daniel makes a really critical decision. He will not defile himself by eating the royal portions of meat and wine assigned to him by the king. And he requests that the palace master only bring him water and vegetables. The palace master complains that if Daniel doesn't eat the royal portions of meat, his condition will become poor, and the palace master will get in trouble with the king. So Daniel proposes a trial period, and after a while, the palace master sees that he is the fittest of all the servants there, and the implication is that God's favor must be upon Daniel, and maybe that's so. Though I suspect that Nurse Judy is less than surprised that the guy eating the vegetables is the one in the best shape. All right, so the 4 complete their 3 years of training and enter the Babylonian court, and it's around this time that a very interesting thing happens. Nebuchadnezzar has a strange and unsettling dream, and he brings in all his leading Chaldean wise people looking for someone to interpret that dream. And they say, well, tell us the dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar says, no. If I do that, if I tell you what my dream was, you're just going to make something up and tell me exactly what I want to hear. You tell me what my dream was. And these wise people say, that's absurd. We can't do that. We don't know what your dream was. And frankly, no king has ever asked in human history any wise person to do something as crazy as that. And so the king flies into a fit of rage, right? And he decrees that all his wise people will be executed. So the chief executioner, Arioch, comes to execute Daniel and his 3 companions. And Daniel asks what's going on, and Arioch explains it to him. And then Daniel places the ultimate wager on himself. Or perhaps it's better to say the ultimate wager on the power of God at work in and through him. He says, give me a day. Just give me a day, and I will tell the king what his dream was. Now, Daniel probably came to Babylon at about 15 years of age, maybe 18 at this point, goes home, and somehow manages to go to sleep. I don't know how. I don't think I could. But he does sleep. And as he sleeps, God comes to him in a dream and reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream to him. And Daniel awakes, thanking and praising God before describing and interpreting the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, who then says to Daniel, truly, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, to which I say, amen. There was a young man who grew up here in North Texas, good kid, talented, popular, athletic. And when he graduated, he won a full soccer scholarship to a college on the beach in San Diego. It was a big and exciting change for this young man. So he moved out there, and he got registered for classes and got settled in and started going to practice. And within 2 months, less than 2 months later, he was back home in Granbury for good. Now, I'm not picking on this young man. He's a successful man now, family man, doing great. But at the time, I thought, what are you doing? What are you doing? You just walked out on a college scholarship in San Diego after less than 2 months to come back to Granbury and work for pennies and hang out with your friends. And then later, when I worked as a college admission counselor, I saw this pattern repeat again and again and again. Why? Well, this young man's answer was, it was no good. Just not a good situation out there. Not a good place. Really? Really? Your college on the beach in San Diego was just not a good situation? Not a good place for you? Well, I think that this young man would probably admit now that the issue had little to do with San Diego or the college or the soccer team or his coach or anything else related to the situation that he found out there. The real issue was almost certainly related to the question of who he saw himself to be in that new and perhaps different and scary situation. See, every situation that we find ourselves in is a mirror in which we see ourselves reflected. If our situation never changes, we get used to seeing ourselves in that same mirror day after day after day. And even if you're homely like me, there's a comfort in that, right? You are familiar to yourself. And in the comfort of that familiarity, you can consciously or subconsciously perhaps craft the story of your personal identity that you want to believe and that you want others to believe as well. But when your situation changes, your mirror changes. Suddenly, the things that you put out into the world, your words, your actions, your offerings, your gifts, your flaws, all these things that form your identity are reflected back to you in a different way. And you may not recognize the person that you see in that mirror. See, I'm guessing that young man got out there to San Diego, different people, different rhythms of life, different culture. Maybe he talked himself into asking, what is wrong with this place, right? But the real question that he was wondering about at the depth, at the core of his being was, who am I here? Who am I here in this different place? We experience this when we move. We experience it when we get a different job, when we lose a job, get a new job. We experience it when we retire. We experience it certainly in a powerful way when we lose someone that we love. Perhaps a parent that we've been caring for, a spouse, beloved, or even worse, a child, okay? So much of our story, so much of our identity, of who we understand ourselves to be, is wrapped up in how we relate to the people that we love most. And when we lose one of those people, we not only miss them, and there are those watching this today, participating in this worship service today, that know this far better than I do, okay? We not only miss them, those people, but we also struggle to figure out who we are without them. And that's scary. Friends, this probably explains a lot, too, about why we so fear change in church, right? I read an article recently about a church that made the very difficult decision to get rid of their big facility. They sold their big facility and they went completely online. And this was before all of this COVID stuff. And the article that I read was very complimentary of the foresight that must have been involved in that decision. And that may be true, but you also have to imagine that there were a lot of people for whom that decision was extremely painful, right? People whose ministry identity was wrapped up in things like serving food to other people at church, or serving communion at church, or caring for the facility, right? I have to confess that even for me, when someone shares with me a very forward-thinking idea about how to do and be church together, one of the first things that I often feel is the sort of an involuntary, gut-level resistance to that. And it's probably not because I don't think it's a good idea. It's because I subconsciously think, I don't know how to do that yet. And who am I? Who am I as a minister in a church like that? Psychologists call this ego death. Not a literal death, but ego death, the very unsettling death of who we knew or at least thought ourselves to be. So here's a 15-year-old Daniel, right? Prominent, promising young man, probably well off, good parents, good education, every opportunity to live a full and whole and blessed and meaningful and happy life. And then his whole world is flipped upside down, kidnapped, taken from his family to a strange land with an unfamiliar culture, a different language, the prisoner of a king who, by the way, would decide on a whim to have all of his wise people executed because he had a bad dream that nobody could interpret to him. And what did Daniel do? How did he respond to the fear that he must have felt, that must have been so overwhelming for him? He did the one thing he could do. With everything changing around him, this maelstrom swirling around him of change, with his sense of himself, his place in the world changing, he held on tight to the one thing that is unchanging, that is immovable, that is permanent, his God. He would not defile himself with the king's rations, and instead feasted on God's rations of strength and patience and courage. When the king threatened his life, he went all in on faith. He went all in on trust. And when that was rewarded, he prayed this beautiful prayer of chapter 2, verses 20 through 23. I have to read this to you today. If you've got your Bible, open it up to Daniel chapter 2, verses 20 through 23. This is a testament to God's permanent enthronement over our fickle and volatile world. Daniel's words: "Blessed be the name of God from age to age. For wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons, deposes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness. Perhaps he makes it tremble. And light dwells with him. To you, O God of my ancestors, I give thanks and praise." And this is the word of God for the people of God. And together we say, thanks be to God. See, friends, it's interesting, and I think a bit ironic as well. This thing, and it is one of our greatest fears, the fear of change. But this thing that we fear so much, death of ego, fear of change, is one of the things that is actually best for us. One of the things that God most desires of us and for us. Yes, the world is changing like crazy. I don't have to tell you that. Some of the changes are good, some of them probably not so much. And we might disagree with each other about what those things are, and perhaps that's another sermon for another day. Regardless, if we are being honest with ourselves, we might not really fear those changes as much as we fear losing track of who we are in relationship to this rapidly changing world. And at the end of the day, the message of the first 2 chapters of the book of Daniel is this: who the world tells you you are is irrelevant. It is irrelevant. All the titles, all the labels, all the identities that the mirror of life reflects back to us are irrelevant except for one: God's child. God's child. You are God's child. Daniel stands in a strange place, in the court of a strange and violent king, knowing nothing but that, and it's enough. Can we do the same thing? Can we stand in the maelstrom of global pandemic and political mayhem and social strife, close our eyes, and allow those 3 words to flow over us, to rise in prayer above the din? I am yours. Because if we can, we will discover that God uses change to grow us. That it is precisely when we give our ego over to death and become less that God will make us more than we ever thought possible.